Good morning, everyone. Recording in progress.
All right, now we're ready. Good morning, and thank you for coming. Appreciate it. So Scott Roeder is a retired business person who worked at Marco Technologies. And he and his wife, Reyne, have been married for 38 years. They have 4 children, Michelle, Jamie, Jackson, and Cassie. And they also have 2 grandchildren, Violet and Levi. Okay. Scott is also a suicide loss survivor. He lost his son Jackson to suicide 7.5 years ago. Now, Scott is an active advocate for mental health and suicide awareness. His advocacy includes many things, and so I have a list, and I'm going to read them because there's a lot here, and I don't want to get them wrong. So he's on many committees and boards, the Minnesota National Alliance on Mental Illness Legislative Committee, the Minnesota State Suicide Prevention Task Force, and he is co-chair of the Post-Prevention Committee, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and he is an AFSP Healing Conversations representative. He's a member of the Central Minnesota United Way Mental Health Committee, and he is on the leadership team of the Central Minnesota Suicide Prevention Coalition. He's also a member of the Diocese of St. Cloud Mental Health Ministry Team, and he's also a member of the Health Ministries Team of Central Minnesota. He also leads the Jackson Roeder Memorial Fund to honor his son Jackson. And thank you, Scott, so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for allowing me to be here. I'm on the tail end of a cold. I'm going to go slow. Might have to take a little bit of water here or there, but really appreciate you having me here today and hearing our story. I'm retired from Marco, as she mentioned, and my wife, I started doing this, I retired 3.5 years ago, and so I started doing this advocacy after we lost our son, and my wife said, hey, you can't do both, you know, because I just see I'm doing a lot, so I didn't think I'd be doing all this, but that's what my retirement is doing a lot of advocacy. But I'm going to share Jackson and our story with you, and then I have some resources I want to show you, and then I'm open for all questions and answers at the end. So I want to talk about mental health awareness and suicide awareness and prevention. Our son Jackson experienced gaps in his care for his mental health, and I want to talk about ways to close those gaps and help those who need resources for mental health and suicide awareness. We want the community to know better on risk factors and warning signs and provide a pathway to care for resources. Our Jackson was an amazing young man. At an early age, Jackson was a fun-loving little boy. He enjoyed playing with Legos, Connects, and Star Wars. In elementary school, he was introduced to painting. That's one of his paintings. That wasn't in elementary school, but in middle school, he began working with home builder software on their home computer. He was a musician, playing the sax and electric guitar, and he loved adventure. He was a marathon runner, tough mudder, slackliner, motorcycler, and MS Tram participant. Being 6'6", his presence was always felt when he entered the room. He loved his niece and nephew and adored his younger sister. Jackson, as I said, was a gifted artist. He took summer school when he was 9, 10, and 11 years old. The summer school teacher was an artist, and when he completed his studies, he got to paint for extra credit. He did not come back to art until the last semester of high school. I remember he came up to me at home and said, hey, Dad, I'd like, for my last semester, he was at Cathedral, for my last semester of my senior year, I want to go into art. I said, Jackson, you haven't done this since elementary school. There's a few prerequisites. He said, well, I've been doing some painting in my room. I'm just going to take my paintings and show the art teacher. And our teacher said, you're in, So he learned a lot about acrylics that year, and he actually qualified for the state high school art competition. You know, we're all used to state hockey and state football. They actually have an art one. And he qualified for 3 categories, and he ended up giving 2 of his slots away to other kids in his class so that they could participate. And then he just went and won, and he took first in his. So that's the kind of character he had. Jackson then pursued his passion at NDSU in Fargo, working towards his master's in architecture. Jackson also had challenges. He struggled with mental health at a young age. In kindergarten, he missed getting diagnosed for ADHD. He was considered borderline. We wish he would have been rechecked a year later. In 6th grade, he started writing dark thoughts in his papers, and we were notified by the school. He went in for extensive testing, and at the time, was diagnosed with ADHD, anxiety, and depression. He also was experiencing bullying at this time. He then began medication and counseling. Later in college, he was diagnosed with bipolar. We worked with Jackson throughout his lifetime with educators, counselors, psychiatrists, psychologists to get him the care he needed. Jackson struggled with cutting. I didn't know what that was, and that was in high school. And he had an suicide attempt in high school. In early 2015, his junior year of college, he had a self-harm incident that had him hospitalized for 10 days. He was closely watched and given intense counseling and new medication. He then needed to come home and take a year off of college. He had to continue seeing a psychiatrist, psychologist, and adjust to his new medication before being able to go back to school. During this time away, the summer before, Jackson had met with a couple of architecture firms in St. Cloud to make sure that that's what he wanted to pursue. Now that he had to be home for the rest of the year before he could go back to school, I said, hey, why don't you check those firms and see if you can maybe work for them while you're getting your treatment. And so he did. He ended up hooking up with Hagemeister Mack Architects here in St. Cloud, and he did really well. And he ended up doing renderings for the YMCA, the Melrose Church. Turned out to be a really good experience. So at the beginning of 2016, he returned to college. He was successful in his return. He now was having lunch weekly with his sister, who was attending, he was at NDSU, Cassie was at Concordia. We were making road trips to Fargo for visits. He formed a strong relationship with another architecture student and met a new girlfriend who he became very close to. These relationships were very positive for Jackson in 2016, and he was seeing a counselor in Fargo. He was doing the best we thought at that time. So in February 2017, we were shocked by his passing. His friends and we as a family had not seen any signs that indicated a problem after his return to school. My wife and I were actually on a trip at the time of Jackson's death. We were on a flight from New Zealand to Los Angeles, and where we had a 4-hour layover. After landing in LA, we had a voicemail from our youngest daughter. She was crying and asked for us to call immediately. I looked at my wife, Reyne, and said, something's going on with Jackson. We had to get our luggage and find a place for cell coverage. We then connected with Cassie, who told us Jackson had died. My wife let out the loudest shriek and collapsed into my arms. It was the worst call of our lives. I will never forget it. It was literally the longest day of our life. We had 2 Saturdays from crossing the international date line. Our daughter was notified by the sheriff 4 hours earlier because they could not reach us since we were on a plane. She waited all that time and had to tell her parents. She also had to tell her 2 older sisters. She had to be an incredibly strong young woman at age 21. We tried to get an earlier flight to Minneapolis, but could not and had to wait at the airport. From the airport, we notified other family members who were devastated. I then told my wife we have to call law enforcement and the funeral home. We had to do the unthinkable process of burying our son. We then made our final flight home, and our daughters met us at our family home, and we all cried through the night. The following day, family and friends came to support us. One area that surprised most of our family and friends is most did not know Jackson struggled with mental health issues. We also had felt the pressure of the mental health stigma by not being able to feel comfortable sharing all of Jackson's problems with others, for fear of people not being sympathetic and then creating more issues for Jackson. This is now starting to change, and it needs to continue to change so people can be comfortable talking about getting support. We then met with our church and our pastor and liturgist, and they grieved with us as we planned our son's funeral. The week of the funeral was a blur, and the funeral week, we talked to family, as a family, to make sure we all knew we would grieve differently, and that was okay. Our faith community was extremely helpful. Members of our faith community took the time to comfort us and be there with us. Our faith is strong. We no longer have a fear of dying. We believe in eternal life, and we will be with our son Jackson again. We did seek counseling early on to deal with grief, first as a couple, then as an individual. Our youngest daughter was concerned about our marriage, how the death of a child can impact a marriage. We also went to a local suicide loss survivor support group, which I found helpful. One member of the group, and I won't forget, he told me, "You will never be the same, but it will get better." And he was correct. Time does allow you to mend. I also joined the Compassionate Friends private Facebook group for suicide loss survivors of children. This was another helpful resource. My wife found more of her support in reading books and watching video series on grief. At our son's wake, we recognized the stigma of mental health and suicide. We had a steady stream of people for 4 hours. The line actually was quite efficient because people could not find any words to say. Only those who experienced mental health challenges and suicide could talk. We did hear one common line which we found challenging. People would say they could not imagine what we were going through. We felt most who said this knew that they did not want to be in this new club we were members of, the Suicide Loss Survivor Club, which we did not want to be in. When I learned of Jackson's death in California, I told a friend that I was traveling with that I had lost hope. I spent 20 years being there for my son in his mental health journey, feeling that in the last year and a half of his life, he had made it and was finally managing his mental health. And now Jackson was gone. But at the wake, a woman with a baby shared how Jackson made a difference in her life. Jackson's senior year, he had to do service work at Camp Friendship out in Annandale. When his shift ended that evening, he called home and said, "Hey Mom," I actually talked to my wife, I said, "Mom, I can't come home. There's a woman whose friend's dying in the hospital, and she's asked everyone for a ride, and I'm the only one who can give her a ride." So he drove her to the hospital, stayed the night until other family members arrived. We had to go pick him up that morning. But here now, 5 years later, this woman's telling about how he made a difference that night for her. So I still just realized that, I heard other stories from his classmates saying the same thing. And I thought, I still have hope to make a difference. So after Jackson passed away, I ordered all of Jackson's medical records. 6 months later, I had the courage to review those records. I saw sessions he had been in that spoke of suicide ideation, while under care at a time we thought Jackson was doing fine. Jackson being high risk, we wish this info would have been shared with us. We also found out after Jackson had passed, he had communicated with some past friends prior to his death about how he was struggling with depression and suicide ideation. Again, we wish those peers had shared this information with us. Jackson suffered from depression and then bipolar. With Jackson being high risk, we wish a suicide safety plan would have been implemented. We were unaware of these types of plans that providers can create. Jackson had a website for his architecture portfolio in pursuing his career goals, which we were unaware of until after Jackson died. We've taken over this website and have added mental health and suicide prevention and support resources for those who need help. We also have Jackson's Memorial Fund to raise money for suicide awareness. We sell reprints of Jackson's artwork to go towards the Jackson Roeder Memorial Fund. Actually, it's going to be 8 years in February since we lost Jackson and started doing these paint reprints probably the fall after, and I just did the 211th reprint. So people continue to have interest. Jackson's Fund has been directing monies to help Central Minnesota local healthcare system, Centricare, in implementing the zero suicide model. The zero suicide model looks at closing gaps in care like missed medications, missed appointments, smooth transitions to new doctors. The model focuses on 4 key areas for its success. It needs to have healthcare, education, law enforcement, community working together on suicide prevention. As suicide loss survivors, we are part of the community, and I am sharing our story to make a difference to help others get resources they need to assist in getting help. We hope that in the future, more people will learn about the risk factors and warning signs to help those in need, and we work towards closing the gaps in mental health care. Some of the things we've been doing, and when I finish, I'll show you the website a little bit, but we've been creating bereavement materials for loss survivors and providing those to the community. We've been doing banners. You're all familiar with 988. Who's familiar with 988? 988 is a crisis. It's not even just crisis. It's a number to call when you have a mental health or substance abuse concern. It's manned by trained professionals. It's answered 7/24, 365 days a year. You can call it, you can text, or you can chat. Text is a big thing for our young people. That person will take that call. 95% of the time will talk them through that crisis and calm them down. If they can't, they actually will do a warm handoff to mobile crisis. Here in Central Minnesota, that would be Central Minnesota Mental Health Center. They have a mental health team. A mental health crisis needs a mental health response. With permission, they will send one of their mental health team members out to that crisis at 5% of the time to work through that crisis. They're not sending the police. That's the worst thing you can do for a mental health situation. It's got to be a safe situation. But, so that's a big deal with 988. So we've created, there's 988 banners now, and we put 988 banners up into the local schools. I can share more about that. That's all with Jackson's Fund. I was out at my grandson's hockey game at the back, the Ritchie Arena, and there was a dasher board with 988. And again, that's Jackson's Fund putting that over there. Jackson's Fund, along with 2 other businesses, Design Electric and McDowell, we've funded a full-time suicide program prevention position at Centricare. So that was back 3 years ago. They just put on a second position for that work. So on Jackson's website, we have a resource section, and each, it starts, shows 988. We have mental health resources, suicide prevention, suicide loss survivor, and bullying resources for people. So that's why I have those cards. If someone's needs some resources, I can direct them to the website. We do a monthly newsletter that I've been sending out for 3 years, talking about what we're doing with Jackson's Fund. It's also on Facebook. You can always go to jacksonroeder.com and subscribe if you're interested. Gene mentioned the committees that I'm on. Compassion is what is needed. Compassion for the individual with a mental health condition. Compassion for mental health advocates, family, and friends. And compassion for the suicide loss survivors. We did not plan to be on this journey in our life. We honor our son Jackson in making a difference in central Minnesota. And I want to finish with a quote from Maya Angelou. Maya's quote is, "Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better." And that's what I'm trying to do with the loss that I had of my son. So that's my story, our story. Thanks for letting me tell you about that. And I have some resources I'd like to share with you, but I can start with some questions and answers.
I have a question. I know a former Minnesota politician, Paul Wellstone, was supposed to have been pretty phenomenal in terms of trying to make things better and support people with mental health issues. And I was wondering, currently, for example, just in Minnesota, what kind of support do these organizations and groups get in terms of politicians?
Well, there's some legislative change that I've wanted. There's some privacy laws that I think need to be changed here in Minnesota. We're all familiar with HIPAA. HIPAA's fine. But we have an extra layer here in Minnesota. It's called the Minnesota Health Records Act, and most people don't know about that. And it prevents providers from reaching out to caregivers when someone's at high risk. Because the way the law writes is that they will either lose their license or get sued. So a lot of times they won't reach out. That's why when I saw that in that year and a half, and I thought Jackson was doing good, and he wasn't, I just wish I'd got a call. I don't know if I could have changed anything, but I'd have circled the wagons, and did what we needed to do, and that's not right. And so I had lunch with Jeff Howe and Eric Putnam and Bernie Perryman. I know them all, and that's why I'm on the non-legislative committee. I've been trying for 8 years to get this modified. We got it tweaked a little bit, but it doesn't make sense to me. So NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness, they work very close with a number of other mental health providers throughout the state. And they look at what change needs to happen every year, and that's what they push for. So politicians, I've learned, I didn't know I learned this much about politics, but this is like a bipartisan issue. Both Democrats and Republicans are all in, on helping with mental health. It's really an area that's really popped up a lot now, affecting a lot of our young people. So yeah, it's got everybody's attention to try to put funding towards it. I think it's one in 5 or 1 in 4 of us will experience some type of mental health issue in our life. And we should be able to talk about that just like we talk about physical health. You need all of it, your spiritual health, your mental health, your physical health, all those working together.
So it's Minnesota, that extra layer above HIPAA. Are we unusual among the other states that we've got that?
Yep. Us in New York. There's some that have the strictest, there's some other, other restrictive policy, but not as strict as ours. And it came out before HIPAA, so it has more precedent than HIPAA. HIPAA's fine. It says right in HIPAA, if someone's at risk, you can make the call to the caregiver. I'm just saying, let's just be like the other 48 states. Just have HIPAA. So, but it doesn't go that easy.
Okay. I was just wondering
Yeah.
where legislation.
Yes.
With your advocacy, do you do work for yellow and red flag laws? Like for yellow and red flag laws for getting weapons out of people's hands?
Our fund has not done that. I'm part of the Central Minnesota Suicide Prevention Coalition. I'm very familiar with red flag laws. It's a hot topic, but personally, if someone's at risk, you gotta get their weapons. My wife got a call one night from one of her coworkers and said, hey, I'm really concerned about my son. He's down in the cities, he's really telling me things that I'm just really scared. And we talked to her, and my wife said to her, does he have a firearm? And she said, yes. And she says, go immediately to his house. She drove to the cities, and he gave up his firearm. You know, I mean, it just, women attempt more males die because males use firearms, and it's lethal. You know, it's so it's, yes, firearms is a big deal. And however they term it, we call it red flag law or whatever. But if someone's in a risky situation, they should not have a firearm, and they can get them back later. If
They
they're
can, yeah. I'm a gun safety instructor,
Yeah.
so I think about that stuff too.
Yeah.
I just was wondering, because it hasn't seemed like it's moving in our state legislature at all.
Yeah, it's such a hot topic. I was going to show you a couple things. So this is a folder for lost survivors, and it has, like when we lost Jackson, and we went through the funeral and everything, afterwards we felt really alone. We didn't know where to go. We didn't know, like I said, we went to a support group, and that really didn't work for my wife, and that's why I started finding these things, and I started putting them on the, Jackson's website. And then doing all this work, and eventually I got on this state suicide prevention task force. I can't even remember how, but after 5 years, where I've spent a lot of my time is helping lost survivors. Number one, I've spent a lot of time on prevention. I don't want anyone to be a lost survivor, but it is still happening. And those people who are in the aftermath need help. And so on the task force, I had up the post-vention committee, which is loss and healing. And we took the best loss and healing resources from NAMI, National Alliance of Mental Illness, and AFSP, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. We put them in a folder. And then we added our local resources, our local support groups. And so we have a folder. And what I've done is I've gotten these to all the funeral homes, because where are you going to end up when you lose someone? At your church or at the funeral home. So I've hit Williams, Daniels, and Miller Carlin. In January, I'm going to catch, right now Jackson's Fund is helping the 4 counties. I want to do something in central Minnesota. So that's Benton, Sherburne, Wright, and Stearns. So I Googled the rest of the funeral homes in the 4 counties, so I'll be calling them in January and getting them out. So that all 4 county funeral homes will have these folders. And I do a little Zoom with them, or I go meet with them, and I talk through what the resources are in the folder. And then told Gene that I do a lot with the Catholic Church. I'm a Catholic, I'm a Christian. I want to help everyone. And but I learned more about the structure of the Catholic Church. I've been working with the bishop, and Catholic Church has 131 parishes in the Diocese of St. Cloud. Well, it's divided. They divide it into fifths. They're called deaneries. Here, I thought, go to 131 parishes with these? That's a lot of work. And they divide it into fifths, so 30 priests meet once a quarter. So last fall, I went to 5 deanery meetings, and they all have these now. So I covered the whole diocese. And in them, they have talks about you're not alone, and these resources about that. It was mentioned that healing conversations, I'm a healing conversation rep. AFSP has this program where I went through training, and I'm able to talk to another loss survivor. Number one, I have to be 2 years out from my loss, otherwise you're still in that kind of acute grief. And we're not counselors or anything, but there's 8 of us in the state of Minnesota, and each of us have a different loss. I have a loss of a child. Kara's on my team. She lost her husband. We have another person on our team who lost her parent, a sibling. So a person can get a hold of AFSP, arrange a call with another loss survivor. Because for my wife, when she went to counselors, they didn't get it. They just don't know what it's like to lose a child, unless you lost a child. 5 years later, I found a counselor for her who actually is a counselor who lost a child to suicide. So it's pretty unique. She gets it. So, but this is, before that, I've talked now to 4 parents who've lost children, and I get it. So I can make sure they got the right resources. I think this is a great program. So that's in this. And then there's actually a whole guide on pretty much everything a lost survivor would need. Where do I start? Why did this happen? What do I do now? Handling the holidays, for your friends, helping children cope. So it's a really good resource. And so I've provided those now to the funeral homes and the Catholic Church, and here I am today at Atonement Lutheran. I have folders. Because it crosses all paths. And I use Jackson's Fund to do that. It actually has another resource about safe messaging, talking safely about suicide. Our society has always been talking about committed suicide, and we don't use that word in the suicide language. We don't commit cancer, it's like committing a sin. My son did not sign up for bipolar and depression. He struggled with mental health, and he got into a place that he couldn't get out. He didn't find the hope to get out of it. I wish he would have. So he died by suicide. Anyway, so that's important to talk safely with a lost survivor. This summer, my sister called me. She said, hey, there's a father, a family that lost their son to suicide this summer. She goes, what do I do? I said, make a panel of lasagna and go over there. Just sit with them. People are so afraid. People will say, like, oh, they come up to me and they're going to talk about Jackson. Think about him all the time. Talk about him. It's not a problem. It's not going to make me go down some crazy path. People just want to talk. I think I've been much more, after losing Jackson, I'm more empathetic and more compassionate. My father, 11 years ago, lost, my mom. I remember for about a year, my dad was just so down. And I was telling my wife, God, I go over and see my dad, he's so down. After I lost Jackson, a month later, I'm at my dad's apologizing to him because I got it. How long am I going to grieve Jackson? How long am I going to be alive? It will get better, but it'll always be a part of my life. My wife and I say our life has changed. It's before Jackson died and after Jackson died. We'll never be the same, but we get stronger to bear that. There's a new term, they call it post-traumatic growth. How do you grow from such a loss? And I would have to say, I never thought I'd be here talking to you. I never thought I'd be on all these committees, but that's, I think, what God has called me to do, the ministry I'm doing. So I'm going with it. So any other questions or appreciate the time? I could show you a picture of a banner. Cross your finger.
Can you talk at all about addiction and suicide?
Yeah, it's when they do the statistics of suicide, that's another path that doesn't probably get brought in. I been to 2 long-term survivor conferences, one for suicide, and all the people who came had a person who lost their life to suicide 5 years prior, or 5 years or more. And that was just suicide loss survivors. Well, then I went to one last summer that was for anyone who's lost a child. Just lost a child for different reasons. And I was so surprised how many parents I met that their children died from opiate, fentanyl overdose. It was staggering. So it's hard to know, if it was, an overdose just from use, or is it an overdose for another reason? So I think that's another area that think it's each year, 50,000 people die by suicide in the United States. 100,000 die by overdose. So it's a big problem. And I really feel it's an area that has to be looked at. That's why 988 is mental health and substance. You know, I don't know if that answers your question.
Question. When we contact our legislators about this health issue, how do we best refer to it so that we're getting their attention?
You know, and that's how I started. Thought, hey, I'm just going to march down there and get this done. You know, let's go. I'll talk to anyone. And it doesn't work that way. I mean, it's all, you got to position on when it comes up. Do they have the right committee? Is it a policy year or is it a budget year? So I've aligned with CentraCare, their lobbyists over there. They work with Alina, and they work with others. There's other reasons to change this Health Records Act. For example, if probably been where you have to sign a release of information, an ROI. Most of that's from the Health Records Act. Well, that's an extra layer too for efficiency, like in billing, communication. So not only is there a privacy factor, it's a much bigger cost for us as Minnesotans to have these two systems in place. You know, so I guess you can talk to I just talked to a legislator and said, I'd like you to make sure that if that comes up, that you support it being modified. You know, that's what I would say.
Thank you.
So you have on your card Jackson's website. This is where you'll come into Jackson's website. As I said, he made this because he was going to be an architect. He wanted to go to Stillwater. And so then he shared his artwork and his architecture work. And his girlfriend told me about this when we went up to get his suit for his funeral. I didn't even know he had this. Then I took it over, and then I created this resource section. Yeah. But here it is: mental health, bullying, suicide prevention. There's the 988, local NAMI, 211, all these different. And there's the state, divided into Central Minnesota, state, and national. Actually, right now, I'm using Jackson's fund to, for the goal of 2025, I get so many people ask, where do I start? My child's struggling. Where do I go? What do I do? Where do I start? Well, we have some really good resources here locally. CentraCare has what's called integrated behavioral health model now. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but when you go to the doctor, you're getting your physical stuff taken care of, and a lot of times you're getting screened as well. You probably are used to filling out how you're feeling, or you're down and out. And those are all screening tools. Well, if those have an indicator that you need some help, they actually have staff available that immediately for you to go see. I'm saying you can go see a mental health provider immediately. It's not like, hey, we'll get you in 3 weeks, you know, or a month or 6 months. People don't know that we have this in Central Minnesota. Over at the Central Minnesota Mental Health Center, the United Way helped fund a mental health navigator. Her name is Reyne. She's there to help people navigate the mental health system. People don't know about this in our community. So down in the cities, they have a website for mental health navigation. They have one for the North Metro, the South Metro, and the East Metro. I want to do one for the 4 counties here in Central Minnesota. So I'm using Jackson's fund to pay for this. So in 2025, I hope to share a mental health navigation site where you get to CentraCare and Central Minnesota Mental Health. Everything will be in one spot. You can call, get to 988. We'll have little videos on how you can do that. Gotta watch the time, 11 is coming.
I think you're good.
Okay. But anyway, so we're gonna do that in, with Jackson's Fund in 2025 for the navigation site. But that's why I started here, you know, I just started putting resources that I didn't have, and I'm neutral. Like, people can go to my site, I'm not Centricare, and I'm only gonna have Centricare stuff. I have everybody's stuff, what I'm doing. I don't know, can I get to, I can't. Can you see that okay? So that's the 988 banner.
Ideas for me to work with that stigmatism of mental health and that, oh, they're crazy, or what, thoughts on how we can make this a part of our health. I mean, mental health is the same as physical health, is the same as.
Well, Minnesota has a mental health network of trainers, and they have people who will come out for free and talk about changing the narrative. It's changing the narrative on mental health. You know, how we can, and just talking about it. There's another class on knowing the warning signs of suicide. It's called QPR, or Question, Persuade, Refer. It's an hour and a half. Just recognizing some simple signs of things changing, but changing the narrative is a really good program. You can have someone out and come and talk about mental health. And that's why we started in the diocese a mental health ministry. You know, we're trying to get our parishes to take on a ministry. I met a gentleman out of Pennsylvania. His name's Ed Shaner, and he has now got a template to create a mental health ministry in your parish, and he's doing this worldwide, where he's creating these mental health ministries. Why not be open in the church? Why not that be a place? You know, people a lot of times seek comfort from their leadership. You know, have a place where it's accepted and can be talked about. And he ends up, Ed does a good job of, he calls it like mental health 101, just knowing some of the common things with mental health, like anxiety, depression, some of those common things that can occur. I don't know if that answers your question. But this is the banner. This is at Tech High School. It started out, I knew they all had the old 1-800, I can't remember the number to call for crisis. And so when 988 came out, that's why I asked Lisa, the gal at Centricare, the new suicide program prevention manager, she said, we have some banners out in the schools with the old number. I said, hey, well, we got to get those updated. You know, you always think someone will do it. Well, I'm going to do it. So I got all the schools in central Minnesota, or in St. Cloud done, Takapawa, Sartell, Sauk Rapids. Well, then I Googled the whole 4 counties, you know, all the schools. There are banners now in all 25 school districts in the 4 counties. I just sent, now I've offered it up to other schools in the state. I'm going to be sending 11 to Anoka next week, and just went over 100 banners. There's a banner at the YMCA, Place of Hope, St. Cloud State, Vo-Tech, St. Ben, St. John's. People need to know about 988, especially our young people. So 988 has been a big push. The folders have been a big push, now the website. Every year something comes up. I don't know where it's going to take me, but so far it's trying to make a difference to honor my son.
Another point I think is if people can get more open about talking about it. For example, I was at a funeral 2 years ago, and the brother was talking about his brother who committed suicide. And he mentioned suicide in this talk, and he mentioned mental health concerns. And I went up to him and I said, you know, when society doesn't cover this up, I think people are more likely to ask for help. But it's almost like no one wants to talk about it, you know, that kind of thing. And thinking, you've got to be more open about it. So I just said, I really appreciate the fact that you were honest about what your brother was dealing with. It's not easy to talk about, but I said, the message you're sending is, this is something that needs to be on the open.
Yeah, one of the, and it's died by suicide. And I met two guys, or I should say, I read a book, Responding to Suicide. It's a pastoral handbook for Catholic leaders. It's mainly for like clergy and stuff, and I just bought the book and read it. I'm not a leader, but I want to know what they're doing. So then I decided, I said, I wonder what we're doing in the Catholic Church here in central Minnesota. So I called the bishop's office and said, who's in charge of training for the priests? And I get a call from one of the priests, and I said, I'm kind of interested in this whole, wanted to talk more about suicide in the church. Yeah. There's a good book. So I Amazoned and sent him one. Well, then he called me, he said, hey, I'd like to do a conference with all our priests about this. You think you get some speakers? I said, well, I'll speak. I said, well, I'm going to call the two authors of the book. One is Bishop John Dolan. He's now the Bishop of Phoenix, Arizona. And Deacon Ed Shaner, the one I mentioned about the ministry. I called them up. Would you guys be speakers? Sure. And so they were going to Zoom in. So we did this 3 years ago. It's on, because I have all this on the website. You could watch the recording if you want. And so they have a book about how to respond to suicide. And these are the things that help. It actually has a section on how to do a homily about it. We've now had 2 masses at St. Mary's the last 2 years. And the bishop's done, and it's for suicide loss survivors. And they're able to come. We do it in September, and we just had one, in September where the bishop does a mass, and he talks about it. Talks about the history of the church. And it's really changed with the Catholic Church. It's not what it used to be. So it's a good book, and then they have another one for just regular Catholics. So anyways, I've learned so much along the way. But I'd share that. Any other questions? I want to be respectful of
Is
your time.
anything being done with the middle school level, because we're seeing more kids with that ideation?
Yeah, the banners do go to middle schools. It's pretty much where that's about the time when they get phones, so you can talk about 9/8. But suicide, it's the second leading cause of death for 10 to 25-year-olds. So these are important topics to talk about. I applaud you for allowing me to come in and talk, to be open, to talk about it. People talk to me all the time because they know I know. People talk to me about mental health, about ideation. I'm talking about parents. Parents will call me because they know I know. And but we should all be able to talk with one another about these things. Yes.
You and your wife lost a child. How did you have to deal with your other children? Helping them get through this loss?
And that's a really good point. A suicide impacts 125 people significantly. It's pretty hard as parents. You're just so devastated. You just try to get up every morning and take a shower and breathe, but you want to be respectful of your children. In this, there's good resources on how to talk with your kids, when to talk, because it's a really difficult topic. I just recently last summer I talked to my granddaughter, who's 13. Because the banners are going up at tech. She's going to tech. I just kind of know what's going on. I haven't talked to my grandson yet. My daughter's talked to them about my son having, a condition with his mental health, with his brain. But they have some really good resources in here how to talk about kids. With my kids, my youngest, my 2 older daughters were married, and my youngest was in college. That's what I referenced Cassie. And we all talked, and I recognized all of us would grieve differently. That was probably the most important thing. My 2 oldest daughters were just super sad. We were super sad too, but they really couldn't talk with us about it, but I respected that. Where my youngest, Cassie, we really bonded together closer. So they have some really good resources to go talk to the kids. Anything else? you have anything else afterwards, you can hang around too. So appreciate your time.
Scott, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much.
With my cold, it's good.
Oh, that's so.